WFYI podcasts are brought to you by Visit Bloomington, Indiana, where Hoagie Carmichael, Booker T. Jones, and John Mellencamp impacted the city and helped it become a music destination. Bloomington is home to a variety of musical artists, live music venues, and hundreds of annual music events. More information at musicbloomington.com.
I'm Kyle Long, and you're listening to Cultural Manifesto. Jessica Dunn is a multimedia artist and musician based in Indianapolis. Her creative practice includes animation, painting, sound design, and interactive installations. Here in Indianapolis, Jessica is perhaps best known for her work with Brain Twins, a creative studio she co-leads with Justin Shimp, specializing in animation and design. She also teaches at the Herron School of Art and Design, where she's an associate faculty member in drawing and illustration. In recent years, Jessica has gained notoriety for her work in music, creating experimental electronic soundscapes under the name Eeeka. Jessica will join me in a moment, but first, let's hear an example of her work. From the album Sleep Metamorphosis, this is Eeeka with The Sound.
Every day I wake up with the sound. Every day I wake up with the sound.
That was Eeeka with The Sound. Eeeka is an experimental electronic music project created by the multimedia artist Jessica Dunn. And Jessica is my guest this week. Let's join our conversation. Jessica, thank you for taking time to be here today. I'm a huge fan of your music and excited to learn more about your work.
Thanks, Kyle.
Yeah, as we get started, I wanted to talk a bit about your background. You're known here in the community for your work as a visual artist, and I want to ask you about that. But first, just give us a sense of where you grew up. Are you a native Hoosier?
I am a native Hoosier. I actually grew up in Kokomo, Indiana, so about an hour north here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you interested in art and music at an early age growing up in Kokomo?
Ever since I could hold a crayon, I've been drawing, and both of my parents really supported my artistic tendencies. Both of them are amazing at drawing, so they taught that to me. And then when I was probably about 5 or 6, they gave me a keyboard, so got started young.
So they were musicians too, or just visual artists, or just creative people all around?
Just creative people. Both of them are really good at drawing, but never really explored it past, I think, high school. My mom sang in the choir. So that's about it.
Yeah. And was it Herron School of Art that brought you to Indianapolis?
It sure did.
Yeah.
I kind of shopped around for different colleges, but Herron gave me a great opportunity, and I decided to stay kind of close to home.
Yeah, it seems like Indianapolis has been a great base for you to launch all of your creative activities. Some of our listeners may know you for your work with Brain Twins. You do design, you do animation, you do visual art. This is a partnership with Justin Shimp that I think you founded around 2011. Tell me, what is Brain Twins for our listeners that don't know?
Yeah, basically we're a creative studio. We have a focus in animation, but we work on exhibits for museums, documentaries, and music videos. So a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and you've done some pretty prominent music videos. I know you worked with Deerhoof not so long ago. Who are some of the other folks you've worked with that are notable in the music world?
One of my favorites was it's called Good Friday by Y, and it's a Boards of Canada remix. And Boards of Canada is hands down one of my top tier artistic musical projects that I've been obsessed with for so long. So that was extremely exciting for us to animate music video for that. And that was through Joyful Noise Recordings.
Jessica, you also do a lot of work as a solo artist. I want to ask you about a few very prominent pieces you were a part of. This goes back to 2010, the opening of 100 Acres at the New Fields, the Indianapolis Museum of Art. You lived, I think, for a summer in an art installation. It was an igloo on what was called Indianapolis Island, in the middle of that giant pond behind the museum that's sort of the center of 100 acres. Tell me about this piece and how you came to live on this island, I think with Michael Runge, another artist here in the community. Tell me about this piece and your time there at the island.
Yeah, that goes way back. I was still in college at the time, and the Herron sculpture program, which I was a part of, we got a lot of these amazing opportunities, requests for proposals, and one of them was for this installation by artist Andrea Zittel. She's the one that created and fabricated the island and the concept for this, some would call experimental artist residency. So Michael Runge and I had this concept to call it give and take, where we'd live on the island and kind of rely on our guests. So we'd row them out to the island, we'd trade with them, something that we drew or made using items that we found in 100 acres, and then we'd exchange that for food, amongst other things. So yeah, that was really wild. Probably one of my wildest life experiences for sure, was living, I felt like a zoo animal at 100 acres at the museum, and lived out there for about 4 weeks straight.
Mm-hmm. Seems like there's a lot of room for that to go wrong. I mean, obviously you weren't stranded out there. You could have run to the gas station to get some chips or something, I guess, in an emergency. But how did it go? Were you able to sustain yourself off these interactions with visitors?
Yeah, honestly, it's really great when you kind of give in and just let things happen, how well things can go. Of course, there are some things I didn't expect. Like, I cut my hand really bad. Thankfully, one of my friends was like a pharmacy tech, and he brought me a bunch of supplies so I could take care of my hand. But we were pretty well fed, and we had like a shower that was a jug, like an empty jug that we would just put water in, let it warm in the sun, and then uncap and then shower. And then we had the access to the visitor center that's in the woods, so I'd row out if I really wanted to use the bathroom and a nice toilet, or get on the internet to post a blog post.
Yeah, and that's a really beautiful space there. Yeah.
Gorgeous.
That was pretty early in your career as an artist, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you were a student at the time or had just graduated?
I was still a student.
Yeah. How did that shape your perception of what life as an artist is, and did it influence your work moving forward in any way?
It really did. So going into Herron, I started as a painter. I thought about art very kind of two-dimensionally, like art is a painting that goes on a wall. And that's how I kind of went into school. And then when I took 3D design, it really opened up my eyes to see how art really could be anything that I dreamed of, whether it be performance, installation, or a mix of everything, including sound and music. So that really radically shaped where I went with my art, which is, I call it like 4D, is what I really am into.
Yeah. On that theme of 4D art, I want to fast forward to a more recent installation you participated in at the Indianapolis Museum of Art, Newfields. You designed a piece for the Loom, which is a 30,000 square foot immersive digital art space in the museum. It did have that four-dimensional aspect to it. Tell us about that piece and just more generally what you mean when you're describing your art as sort of 4D. You mentioned incorporating sound into the work as well.
Yeah, that was a collaboration with Landon Caldwell, he created the score for that, and I did the visual component, although we concepted the piece together. But that is called Reverie Garden, and it is an immersive art installation that people can walk inside of, and it's like a moving painting essentially. So I created a lot of those illustrations as two-dimensional digital paintings, and then brought them to life through animation. And I was really interested in that space because it's 30,000 square feet. There's all these little cavities and walls and nooks that you can kind of think of to create like a sense of illusion, like using forced perspective. I really wanted people to feel like they were inside of a dream inspired by our native biodiversity here in Indiana.
How does that installation relate to your work more broadly? Does it?
It does. So my biggest goal is to kind of create a feeling, a sense of emotion, or to transport somebody, whether they're listening to a song that I created or whether they're looking at an animation. I really want to immerse them inside of that world. And this was like the ultimate dream on that respect, since we were working with, 360 projection, multidimensional sound. It's just like the epitome of bringing somebody into a physical space inside of my installation. And that's something that I'd like to do more of. Of course, it's a very specific space and something that I can't always work inside of. So it's something that I always try to achieve, whether I'm working on a small scale installation inside of a gallery or an animated film.
And Jessica, you've been working as a visual artist here in Indianapolis for over a decade, but I believe it's only been in the last few years that you started releasing your work as a musician. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, so visual art is something that was definitely more nurtured, something nurtured by my family and something that I invested a lot of my time in. I always was very passionate about music, but I never had any kind of classical training or anything like that. Everything I learned, I did on my own, playing by ear, figuring out things myself. So I didn't really start seriously looking into thinking of it as an art form that I could share something from until around 2019. And actually that's when I think Landon Caldwell had asked me if I'd be interested in performing as Eeeka, which was my project at the time. And that's when I started kind of dabbling and actually sharing it, because it was something I would do kind of like in the bedroom, playing some music, not really taking it too seriously, just kind of having fun with it and experimenting.
You mentioned Landon Caldwell, who's a musician here in the community, runs a label called Medium Sound. I assume you were sharing some of this music with your friends, maybe, just kind of privately? Is that how he heard it?
Yeah, I was just kind of, I'd post something like on a story on Instagram or something like that. And we were friends at the time, but we hadn't become collaborators yet. And he had reached out and he was like, hey, this is really interesting stuff. I think you should play at State Street Pub if you're interested. I could book you on a show. And that's when I started.
I think you have two primary musical projects, Eeeka and Gümmi. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I first became familiar with your work in music through the album Sleep Metamorphosis, which I think you issued in 2021. And is that correct? Roughly?
No, I don't even remember. I think it was like 2020 or 2021, yeah.
And that was I think your first full-length release as a musician, correct?
Correct,
Yeah. I was blown away by that record. It definitely has qualities of ambient music, although it's noisier at times, but it's almost like these surrealistic landscapes you've created that do have that four-dimensional depth that you talked about earlier in reference to your visual art. There's a feeling of depth in this music through the layering of sound and sound effects that I just found really unique and fascinating to kind of have on in the background or to listen to more deeply. Tell me about that record and your growth as a musician to the point that you were able to put out this full-length release.
Yeah, so Sleep Metamorphosis, that is essentially a concept album. Every artwork that I create, I really do start with a concept that I aim to explore fully and uniquely to whatever that project is. So that was all inspired by dreams and recurring dreams that I've had throughout my life. So it is very amorphous and abstract and ambient at times. It gets really dark at a certain point where there's like a sleep paralysis demon. And I mentioned that because it's a visual album too. There's a full visual animated component for the whole entire album. So kind of thinking of those going hand in hand, influencing each other, and really creating a mood.
How was this project received by the community who, like me, probably knew you as a visual artist primarily?
Yeah, I was surprised at how well received it was and that it sold out. And they also released it in Europe too. And that was really exciting for me because I really leaned into being completely experimental with this one, kind of not thinking about music as having a particular structure. There's some songs on that have more of a typical structure to it, but I really just let go and think about what does this dream sound like and trying to implement that through my music.
You released Sleep Metamorphosis under the name Eeeka. You also have a project I mentioned called Gümmi, which is a duo with Michael Moskaliuk. Is that correct?
Yeah, Michael Moskaliuk.
Moskaliuk, thank you. And this is also very electronic. At times it has more of a rhythmic kind of foundation as well. Tell us about Gümmi.
Yeah, Gümmi, I would say, is more of like a traditional like synth-pop band. We're really inspired by minimal wave from the 1970s and 80s, especially like French minimal synth projects are a big inspiration for us. But that is definitely more kind of poppy in a way, but we still let the experimental things pop or shine through. One of my biggest inspirations musically is Broadcast, actually. One of my favorite bands ever, and I really love the way Trish kind of blended her fully experimental layers into a more traditional pop structure. Our bands sound completely different, but just they're a big inspiration. So I'd say kind of Gümmi follows that, where it's definitely electronic, kind of synth pop, but there are experimental parts that shine through.
Where does being a musician fit now in sort of your artistic practice and your sort of public presentation as an artist? Is this now like a big part of your practice, and going forward, is this going to remain something you're focused on as an artist?
Yeah, I want to really lean into not separating everything. I used to look at everything separate, like my art projects that I did for business for money, separate from my personal art projects, separate from the music, separate from my band, Gümmi, with Michael. And now I'm trying to let them all kind of merge and influence each other. And something that I always considered my music was a means to score an animation or film that I was working on. So I definitely want to lean more into that heavily.
Any future projects you have coming up that you want to share with our listeners? Any long-term ambitions you're working on, looking forward?
Yeah, so currently Michael Moskaliuk, who I am in Gümmi with, that I mentioned earlier, he and I are Crown Hill Cemetery's inaugural artists in residence. So we started that in 2025. In the early phases, we've just been documenting, researching, collecting these long-form time-lapse animations that we're both creating. He's creating the score, and then I'll be creating the visuals for a short documentary film.
That's amazing. I can't wait to see what you come up with. Thank you so much for taking time to be here today. As I mentioned, I'm a huge fan of your music and look forward to how you continue to grow and expand your art as a musician.
Thank you so much.
We've been listening to my recent conversation with the Indianapolis-based multimedia artist Jessica Dunn. She creates experimental electronic music under the name Eeeka. And that's all the time we have for this week. If you appreciate the news and arts programming you hear on this station, please consider making a donation now at WFYI.org/give. And check out the Cultural Manifesto podcast at WFYI.org or wherever you listen to podcasts. Cultural Manifesto is hosted and produced by me, Kyle Long. Thank you for listening.
WFYI podcasts are brought to you by Visit Bloomington, Indiana, where Hoagie Carmichael, Booker T. Jones, and John Mellencamp impacted the city and helped it become a music destination. Bloomington is home to a variety of musical artists, live music venues, and hundreds of annual music events. More information at musicbloomington.com.